Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 14th of October, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by live Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Well, since we've got a Scottish component to the news, as is usual on a Friday, we better just say that the weather in east central Scotland is apparently not too bad, with some patches of blue there amongst a generally overcast sky. It's a bit chilly in Glasgow and gloomy and damp in Cardiff, but Holland has apparently got some sunshine peeping through, which will help to dry out the dikes.
Okay.
Where do we start? We'd better start, I think, today with what has become simply Dross media reporting. What better place to start, of course, with the Telegraph. And this is part of their politics summary that was kindly sent through to us, written by Asa Bennett. We've got Britain may decide against Brexit when they realise just how painful it would be. That's a warning from an EU chief. Fraser Nelson, the Marmite war is over. Now let's fight to cash in on the falling pound. Obviously, very important stuff around Marmite. Woman leading Brexit legal battle accused of special kind of arrogance. And Boris Johnson has been blasting those who prophesise Brexit doom as wrong. MP moves House of Commons to tears as she shares story of the death of her baby girl. And Donald Trump says sexual assault allegations are completely false. So we've got utter rubbish appearing in what is supposedly one of Britain's intellectual papers. And this seems to be the theme at the moment, that people are getting confused by the fact that they are actually commenting they're hearing complete rubbish coming out of the BBC and our mainstream press. Sorry, let's just have a look at the article about the MP crying in Parliament, and here she is. And Vicky Foxcroft apparently brought others in Parliament to tears as she spoke movingly about losing her baby daughter. Now, in reporting this, we're not belittling her loss in any way, but this is really what we wanted to say. It's amazing that why she can cry for the loss of her child. There are no tears in Parliament for the thousands of UK children abused, tortured and murdered. There are no tears in the British Parliament for the 300 plus Syrian children who are still missing in UK, totally unreported, still missing. And of course, there are no tears in Parliament for the thousands of children killed in the unlawful wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and of course, Yemen. So we are seeing more and more of this. Politicians who seem to think that the moment they go through those doors into Westminster, they're into some sort of unique world of their own, where they can cry literally about their own losses, but they don't seem to have a care in the world for what's happening around them. And if we follow that article along, that will bring us here. We've got the pantomime of US elections, as was mentioned. We've got everything from sexual allegations. We've got Hillary, of course, who's been joking about the deaths of people. We've got real deaths around the Clintons. I think the number is up to 68 people who've mysteriously died after coming into some form of conflict with the Clintons. We've got Hillary's security breaches. And of course, we've got threats of nuclear war. So it's fascinating to watch the press in UK, at least, because they've really gone for Trump. Everything is to do with sexual allegations. Meanwhile, this is what I picked out by just doing a simple search today. We've got Hillary Clinton, who is probably going to do a very good job because of her experience to do with the military and war zones, Mike. This is the person that is gently being eased through to become the president. We've got another one from The Guardian, Hillary Clinton's election landslide. So I think we know what's going on there. And the Indian Express is talking about Hillary Clinton's really professional comments on China. So a pantomime, who would you choose between how can the Russians form foreign policy with either of those two people as President of the United States?
And well, before we discuss that, maybe we should ask what David thinks.
Well, you're seeing kakistocracy. Kakistocracy means rule by the worst. And how do you get that in a democracy? Well, you make sure the choices are, well, what you see here. You have a political insider hugely compromised to foreign governments with a very murky financial past and an even murkier legal past, up against, well, Trump is a strange one. Trump's an outsider. There is definitely something of the fascist tendencies about what he's saying by way of policy, and in many ways, it's a very unappetizing choice for the United States. I did watch the last debate, and it was halfway between political debate and the Jeremy Kyle show. Some of it was really quite mortifyingly embarrassing to watch.
Yeah, a couple of clowns perhaps, but we'll leave it to Sergei Lavrov, because if anybody hasn't seen the little video that RT is distributing, it's a snippet from an interview with a CNN interviewer, and she said to him, Russia had its Pussy Riot incident a while back. What did Sergei Lavrov think of Donald Trump's Pussy Riot incident problems? And he basically said there are so many pussies around the presidential campaign on both sides that I don't really want to comment on that. He was totally deadpan about it. It was very interesting insight into his mindset, I think. And the CNN interviewer broke down in laughter at that point. She wasn't expecting it. Anybody wants to have a look at that? It's on Facebook. It's on my Facebook page. You can go and have a look.
Well, there we are. We've got the Russians absolutely astonished at the clown politics that have been unfolding over months in the United States. And if we look at what's happening in UK, particularly around Boris Johnson, we got the same clown politics coming out here. But this man possibly wins the prize. It's Andrew Mitchell MP. The quote here from Press TV, but this is a real quote which is out in the press. But basically, he's suggested that attacking Russian jets would not amount to a declaration of war against Russia, and was rather a sign that Britain will stand against Moscow's war crimes. So I'm just going to bring in a comment here. These people are getting just unbelievably dangerous, because not only are they clearly stupid, they believe that they have knowledge, they believe that they are the leaders of our society. And this man is saying, well, we should really be shooting down Russian aircraft, but don't worry, because they're not going to take that as a sign of war, declaration of war. What do you think they might take it as, Mike?
A friendly gesture, undoubtedly.
Friendly gesture from the British government. So was that the guy that there was a little incident with his bike going into Westminster, and I think he called the police, or allegedly called the police, something numpties or words to that effect?
Yes.
So this is the man who is in Parliament with his wisdom suggesting that we should shoot down Russian jets. David, I'll let you respond to this, because as is increasingly common, I'm running out of things to say about what happens in Westminster.
I'm not surprised you're running out of things to say. I mean, the level of crass stupidity here is unbelievable. I mean, this is an example of someone who should not be allowed within 1,000 miles of any degree of power or any influence over international policy in this country. People will die. He will have blood in his hands, and people with these sort of attitudes will not be the people who pay the price. It'll be the ordinary British citizens, the sort of people who have seen us through 2 world wars and countless other conflicts and protected this country from all enemies for 1,000 years, that will have to pay the price. These people just do not deserve our support.
Indeed. Well, another day, another military exercise, and thanks to Roy for this one. But this is Exercise Guardian North 16. Royal Air Force fighters, I think it's all of them, 4 Typhoons heading over to Japan. And this apparently represents an opportunity for the 2 air forces to learn from each other and develop their skills. And this is number 2 squadron based at RAF Lossiemouth. They're flying Typhoon jets to Misawa Air Base in northern Japan for joint exercises with the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. And this is the first time that the Japanese have hosted an exercise with a foreign nation other than the United States. And they're saying that exercising together delivers on an agreement made at the January 16 Foreign and Defence Ministers Dialogue. That's a 2+2. So, Brian, do you think it's significant that Japan is hosting a country other than the United States for this type of exercise?
I do, of course, because what you can see at the moment is as the tension increases in the South China Sea, the policy, certainly the American policy, is to group up other nation states to get on board the American line. So on one hand, we can say, well, this is only a couple of aircraft, but nevertheless, it's giving a message of collaboration between the two countries. The other thing that happens, which I think is significant, is to get this sort of exercise off the ground, they've got to have the advanced liaison teams in place. And it will be through those liaison teams that, of course, all the propaganda will be pushed as to what the threat is, what is the joint threat our two countries face. And off the back of that, you then start the military cooperation. So I think this is a huge propaganda exercise, but what is it supposedly doing? Showing that there's international support for the US line on its action in the China Sea.
In the mainstream media coverage of this trip to Japan, they were saying that this is not designed to put pressure on China, but of course that's a load of rubbish, isn't it?
Well, that is a complete lie, and we're just seeing lie after lie after lie of anything to do with where a combat situation is created overseas, and nothing to do with us. But of course, this is supposedly to be a message to the Chinese. But we've got to say, and it's no disrespect to serving members of the armed forces, that as Britain's levels of equipment, the number of aircraft available has dropped and dropped. This is really just a publicity exercise because Britain does not have the forces to back up any major overseas campaign, whether it's in Europe, let alone the other side of the world. So this is complete bluster, and the British government is allowed to get away with it.
Indeed. Well, immediately after Guardian North 16, the Typhoons are heading off to Korea. And this is exercise Invincible Shield. And this takes place early in November, 4th to the 11th. And this is deepening the security partnership, apparently, between Britain and the Republic of Korea. And again, this is the first time that Korea has held these types of exercises with any other country than the United States.
Am I correct in thinking this is the same aircraft that are moving from Japan?
Well, it has to be
South
because
Korea.
we don't have any others.
Well, this is precisely my point. So we've got a few aircraft, and to look big on the world stage, we'll simply transfer them around from nation to nation, so they pop up. Maybe we're going to get cardboard ones like the Scottish police in due course. David?
Well, we can have cardboard with many things. The Scottish police, as you mentioned, they have introduced cardboard police officers. They're called scarecrows, apparently in police parlance, and tatty bogles in Scottish parlance, and they're set up to cause motorists to slow down. Now, I'm not so sure that it would have the same effect on an invading armoured division, but let's hope so.
Yes. Okay. Well, getting on to slightly more serious subjects then, the Russians, of course, getting more and more concerned at American. How can we even describe it? It's insanity, really, isn't it? So this is the Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. He told CNN, I think, on Wednesday that the danger of basically miscalculation is the word that he's using. The risk of miscalculation has increased, especially with NATO being deployed next to their borders. He's saying that normal channels of communication between the United States and Russia are frozen. And this has got to be the most dangerous aspect of this. There is no communication going on, is what he's saying. He's saying, we see the United States taking unfriendly steps towards Russia, including sanctions There are calls for isolating Russia. It doesn't work with Russia, and it's not going to work overall, is what he's saying. But in the meantime, then, Russia has been holding nuclear tests. Now, this is according to the RussianForces.org blog. I do recommend going and having a look at this website. They're saying that Russian strategic missile forces held missile test firing exercises this week with 3 missiles. Now, the point they make is that October is the time each year where the Russians conduct large annual exercises. They almost always involve multiple launches of ballistic missiles. Last year, the exercise took place on the 30th of October. But the point they're making here is that this year there was no formal announcement of the exercises, so there's something different about that. So they launched a couple of Delta 3, two of the missiles were launched from Delta 3 and Delta 4 ballistic missile submarines, one each from the Northern and Pacific fleets, and a third from the Kura test ridge. So, in a sense, nothing out of the ordinary, but what is slightly out of the ordinary is that the Russians not sort of announcing that they were intending to do this before they did it, which they usually do.
To say that communications are reduced, Mike, is itself extremely dangerous. What does it take? It takes one of these missiles to have a fault and go off trajectory, and then what's got to happen pretty quickly is somebody's got to be warned that this is not an attack, it's a malfunction of equipment, and the thing's got to be defused. This used to happen from time to time in the Cold War, and there were 1 or 2 incidents which were particularly serious because those last-minute communications, actual physical dialogue between the NATO side and the Russians only took place at the last moment and avoided what almost certainly would have been major confrontation. Now we're saying that we've got a total breakdown in those communications. And how's that been achieved? By the joint policy, of course, of the US, UK, NATO and the EU over Syria. Indeed.
And now, which brings us on to Yemen and Syria, because I think on Wednesday when Vanessa Beeley and David Ellis were on, we were talking about the possibility, the likelihood of false flags in order to justify continued ramping up of the rhetoric and the action. And of course, on, I think this was late Wednesday, we got a hint of this because the United States was claiming that the Houthis in Yemen had fired missiles at a US Navy warship, and so they responded by firing Tomahawk missiles back at the coast of Yemen. Well, this is the first time that I believe the United States has openly attacked Yemen. Usually they leave it to their tame terrorists in Saudi Arabia to do that for them.
This is another incredible thing, Mike, when you think it through. So the US ship was attacked by what? What sort of missiles? Were they missiles or were they rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs? And how do you respond? You launch Tomahawk missiles targeted at what? This is complete Alice in Wonderland going on here at the moment. And perhaps I'll also just add that, of course, this is the difference between the Americans being faced up to the Russians and the Americans being faced up with terrorists with minimal weapons.
Well, in Yemen, they aren't even terrorists. So you know, but in Turkey here, the Independent announcing today that missiles have hit a popular Turkish holiday resort, Antalya. And the question is, who fired them? Well, I'm quite sure the rhetoric is going to ramp up in order to keep the pressure on for action in Syria. This is just unbelievably dangerous, but we keep an eye on it.
Okay. Well, David, Israel is always central to the subject of war. And following on from our look at what's actually happening in the world at the moment, things taking place in Israel. Tell us about this one.
Yes, I thought this was a fascinating piece here. It's covered by Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, and it's concerning a UNESCO motion which has been adopted in the UN.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we've had some difficulties with communication with David Scott, so we're going to have to carry on with the news from the Plymouth studio without David, which is a shame because we're having some interesting discussion there. We have noted that a few of our viewers have commented that this must be the work of the Russians, and probably that's what Theresa May would say, wouldn't she? Well, whilst we've got all of this dangerous rhetoric over the call for war going on, we'd just like to remind people of what the Queen has been up to. So let's bring this on screen. This is from the Daily Mail. And the headline was, "We're bemused. Prince Philip can't take his eyes off Grayson Perry as eccentric artist welcomes the Queen to the Royal Academy of Arts." Now, I'm not sure whether we will be alone in this opinion, but we find this quite offensive. Really, what the Queen is doing is mocking the nation here, that she's giving up official time to attending this sort of event. We'll remind people that recently somebody awarded the royal family the Good Conduct Medal, which was also mocking Britain's armed services. And the one thing we haven't seen the Queen getting involved with is anything to do with getting proper justice for Marine Alexander Blackman. So I think this is part of the pantomime at the moment, Mike. The good conduct was bad enough, but now the Queen is what has become a pop star celebrity to mix with people we might question. I don't know. Well, if it's bad south of the border, things are also bad north of the border. Now, this was an advert which David Scott was keen for us to get up. Highland investigation revealing how the Highland Council really treats the Highlanders. And that's an evening meeting which is going to take place from 7 till 9 p.m. Wednesday, the 26th of October in the Royal Highland Hotel up in Scotland. So this is good to see people starting to come together to talk about what is really happening and what needs to be done. We're also going to say that we're getting an extremely good response to the meeting on the 19th of November in Winchester for the British Constitution Group. If you haven't already bought a ticket, we'd encourage you to do that, because at the moment the ticket sales are going very well indeed. If you buy in advance, that's £10. It will be £20 on the door. And tomorrow in Penzance, the Lugger Inn, which is right on the promenade of Penzance, we've got a talk on, an all-day talk about what's happening in the NHS. If you want more information on that, freeze the screen and you can email Robbie direct, who has set it up. But we'd encourage anybody who's in the southwest or anybody who can actually travel to come down and join us. Obviously, the demise of the NHS is a key topic for very many people in UK, and we are certainly going to be challenging the comments of local Conservative MP Gary Streeter, who says, well, anybody who thinks that the NHS is being privatised must be a conspiracy theorist. And good news in Plymouth, because we've got a constitutional group now being set up locally. So one of Theo's famous adverts here for the Bellerophon, and that warship was the one that brought, and with that his name goes out, Napoleon Bonaparte, how could I forget, it's suddenly got a blank there, brought him back to UK, the ship known colloquially in the Navy as Billy Ruffian. So I presume this is what a hard Brexit would be like, Mike.
Yes.
Something along those lines. So any problems, any concerns about what's happening in the country, what you need to be doing is setting up a network with other people, discussing what is going on, and of course it's getting together and socialising that starts to make people feel good about themselves and want to do something. So don't be shy, invite a couple of people to your local pub. Well, one of the key themes that we'd got planned in this really second section to the news was to have a look at the police. And we're going to thank one of our viewers for pointing us at this document. It's one of the House of Commons research papers. It's about harassment police information notices or early harassment notices. And these are being used by the police in England and Wales. And if we have a look at this document, what we actually see is the police are now making up the law as they go along. So we've just brought in the summary here to give people an idea. We'll have a look at the first paragraph in more detail in just a second. But there's comment in the summary. There's why the police are issuing these pins, because they think it's the right thing to do. But note in the middle of that page, it says no formal right of appeal. So the police doing something off their own back, which leaves the person served with no right of appeal. And at the moment, it does appear that there's some new guidance being made. And certainly there needs to be, because the summary says constituents sometimes ask about the status of police information notices, PINs, which the police may issue where there are allegations of harassment. These notices, sometimes called harassment warning notices or early harassment notices, are not covered by legislation and don't themselves constitute any kind of formal legal action. This is quite remarkable, Mike, because the police have clearly just had a little private meeting. We're going to produce a document which has no legal status, but we're going to use it to, intimidate people.
Is this not a form of harassment?
In itself,
yes.
I would say it is. But of course, as we just move on through the news, we're going to have a look at what the police have been up to in other areas, which makes this of even greater concern.
Do they give any indication as to what type of harassment this would be given out on the basis of?
None at all. But of course, if we look into the harassment law itself, where that comes in is against somebody who is going to accuse a neighbour of harassing them or somebody following them.
What about somebody that's fairly determined about communicating with their MP?
I think this would come into the bracket. If you've tried to communicate with your MP several times, what does that mean? 5 or 6, 10 or 12? The MP then regards you as vexatious, speaks to his local constabulary, and maybe you're going to get one of these notices. So I'll follow that up as best I can with some of the material that David Scott had prepared. But this is very, very interesting. This is from the Lockside Press, and it's an article saying that the MOD police, principally employed to protect the nuclear bases up in Scotland, are going to get a new role to move out and mix with the community. But they say, don't worry, although we've got sort of broadly the same powers as the police in Scotland have, this is simply so that we can keep an eye on what you're doing. We may be interested if you're taking photographs. We may want to know what you've taken photographs of. We may database that, but this is really nothing you should worry about. So I think David's main comment on this, Mike, was the fact that in the public mind in Scotland, we're ramping up terrorist risk. We've now got to bring the Ministry of Defence police out into the civilian world. There's the drive, of course, to arm police in Scotland. And we're going to take data from you, even where it's perfectly lawful to take photographs.
This reminds me of Northern Ireland in the 80s. And it used to be, if you were taking a photograph of a nice panoramic scene, there was a possibility, and I know it happened on 1 or 2 occasions because I know somebody that it happened to, that the military would be standing beside you very, very quickly because unbeknownst to you, there was some kind of hidden military installation in the scene. Does this mean that if you're taking a photograph of the Clyde and there happens to be some kind of ship sailing up, or submarine or whatever it happens to be, that you're going to get lifted? Well,
it appears that is now a possibility because nobody really knows why this has been instigated and what the outcome is. This is another one of these changes that we see. You could say a constitutional change where nobody knows where this decision was made. Perhaps the MOD police made it themselves. Don't know. Now, this one I can only just mention. The subject is cloiping, if I've pronounced that properly. But what this is to do with is children being used by the state in order to spy and report on other people. And of course, we brought this up in the UK column news a day or so ago when we reverted to a Telegraph report back into 2008, which showed that a whole succession of local councils across England were using school children, training them up under programmes with a variety of different names, but a lot of it linked to so-called environmental protection. And then those children were being used to go out on report on people who were dropping litter or doing something else which the council had trained them was wrong. So we reported that this was still ongoing in England, and David Scott had picked up on the fact that it was also happening north of the border. But I'm sure we'll get more details on that the next time we're able to have David Scott with us. So this one is to do with an incident in a school in Scotland. And we've got to say that this whole incident of a boy dying is absolutely fascinating because of the massive concerted cover-up by a range of public sector agencies. So we've had the school linked in with the local authority, in with the police, who have had to employ a private public relations company in order to say, well, we didn't do anything wrong, even though many people in those public authorities themselves are saying that the death of the boy could have been prevented if action had been taken earlier. We also understand there are some rather interesting links back into the Holly Gregg abuse case. Now, I'm not privy to all of the information on that, but just to say that if you're not aware of this story to date, have a look on the internet and read into some of the background where you'll find it fascinating at the scale of operation to present information to the public. Mike, really, we should have had an independent inquiry, a public inquiry into what took place here. But now we're getting a very expensive public relations firm to tell the public, no problem.
No problem.
So if that's Scotland, then this lady wins the prize in Ireland, Clare Daly, speaking out in the Irish Parliament. And what is she saying? She is saying that whistleblowers within the Garda have repeatedly come forward talking about very, very serious crime, particularly to do with large-scale drug operations. And what has happened to them? Have they received any support, protection? No. What she describes is that their whistleblowing consistently ignored by senior members of the police, and they've suffered harassment and bullying. So this is a common picture, whether we're looking in UK or north of the border, and we've got the same sort of thing happening in Ireland. But absolutely fantastic to see this lady brave enough to stand up on her own and actually bring the facts right into the heart of the Irish Parliament. You should be able to find the video of that quite easily on YouTube.
Well, no, the link is at the top of that slide. So if you go back to that slide for a second, Theo.
There we are.
It's claredaly.ie. You can find that on her website.
It's about 12 minutes long, and well, what a wonderful lady. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get that sort of lady into Westminster as one of the British MPs, we'll put it that way. Well, if we take a look at the police, everywhere we go, we're seeing fraud and corruption and more serious crimes. This one from the West Briton is a very interesting article. Child rapist PCSO Peter Bunyan never had criminal records bureau check. What was this man finally convicted of? Well, after already serving time convicted of sex with vulnerable women, he then went on to rape 4- and 5-year-old girls. But while this was all taking place, he was happily serving as a police officer and checking up on other people's records. So we really ask how many more child abusers are actually serving within the police. And does this explain, for example, why we are seeing no full and proper investigations by the police when evidence of police wrongdoing comes to the surface? This one is along the same sort of lines, a bit softer, but basically more police officers arrested in the Devon area as a result of social media, the use of social media around a child abuse investigation. So the underlying theme is again the same. We haven't got straight, upright, moral, honest police officers. We've got something rather different at work. And yet these are the people who are supposed to be investigating child abuse rings and protecting children from abuse. This is, excuse me, yet another one from the Express and Star. Allan Richards, child sex abuse trial. PC carried out fake rape investigations. So abuse of facilities available to this police officer. He made young boys perform sex acts in front of him, supposedly as part of his pretend inquiries. So if we've now got the police prepared to do this sort of thing, really we've got further evidence here of total breakdown in what should be law and order in UK. And this one really is where it takes us to, because a young man was found hanged in a children's home weeks after reporting that his carer had been sexually abusing him. Now, this young man was brave enough to come forward as a whistleblower. He was due to come back into court, and then suddenly he's found hanged in the suit that he was going to wear to court, but leaving a note saying of his abuser, "I hate him so much." So we couldn't get a more emotive headline of what the real danger for children is. And that leads us on to this lady, Ms. Goddard, and we're suddenly seeing the most massive mainstream media attack on her. So some of it came out when she resigned, but here we've got the latest. Judge who quit child sex abuse inquiry was a racist tyrant. Goddard denies saying Britain has so many paedophiles because it has so many Asian men. Well, of course, we've now got Theresa May as Prime Minister, the very former Home Secretary that appointed Goddard. And we've got Amber Rudd clearly taking no proper action to protect children at the moment. What are they doing? But let's have a think about what's happening here. So we're going to say the cover-up works by the following. We're refocusing the media and the public mind on the internal squabbles of the child abuse inquiry rather than on the plight of the child abuse victims and survivors. This is very obvious. We've totally forgotten about the children. Everything is down to Goddard and the rest of the disasters about the inquiry. We're distracting the media and the public from the Westminster and establishment child abusers who are predominantly white towards the idea that all abusers are in fact Asian working men. I've put the working men in there because we're not saying they're establishment Asians, we're saying these are just ordinary men on the streets.
Well, that's what they're saying.
Well, that's right, that's what they're saying, yes. So I've put this in to highlight this fact that the government line is paedophiles are basically dirty old men on the streets, nothing to do with anybody in positions of power. And lastly, we'll say that the British government cover-up is necessary because of the sheer scale of the child abuse, which can only occur, or indeed have occurred, with the collaboration of the Home Office, members of Parliament, judges and the police. And what better way of pushing this home? We probably should bring in this headline just briefly. This is the Telegraph bemoaning the fact that the police failed in their investigation over Lord Bramall. So he's got a big apology from Head of Police Bernard Hogan-Howe. But what is really taking place is when we get genuine police whistleblowers, as with the gentleman who spoke to me as part of dispatches for the UK column, what happened to that Met policeman? Well, he's been harassed, threatened, intimidated in order to try and keep him silent because, of course, he said that the abuse of children was covered up by members of Parliament, senior police officers, local authorities, social services, and even child protection charities. So we've got the whistleblowers bullied and intimidated in UK. This seems to fit the Bill Mike with the with the situation in Ireland and north of the border.
Well, just before we move on to pensions, Brian, what's the latest with Melanie?
Well, the latest with Melanie is, I was going to use the word tragic. I have to use the word tragic because otherwise I think we have to say it is so utterly disgraceful. It makes us very angry indeed. But it's clear at the moment that Melanie is under special restriction within Foston Hall Prison. She is not receiving mail on a proper and regular basis. Many of the letters that she writes are clearly never posted by the prison. No money that has been sent to her has been put into the prison account for Melanie. Whether that's straightforward theft or incompetence, we don't know. And at the moment, Melanie does not know why she's in prison. She has absolutely no idea why she's being held. Is it on remand? Has she actually been sentenced? But in either case, she didn't appear in court to know what her supposed crime was. So our belief is that Melanie Shaw is now a British government political prisoner. And why is she in prison? She's there to make sure her knowledge of Member of Parliament, of MPs who are child abusers, should remain hidden from the public.
Okay, pensions then. And this is John Cridland, CBE. He has been put in charge of a consultation which was launched yesterday, and that is asking the public and representative bodies views on the state pension system of the future. Now, of course, they say the public, but it's the representative bodies that they're really interested in because this is part of the so-called participatory democracy that we're moving to, where only charities, CSOs, NGOs get to take part. So this is all about the state pension age. He is the state pension age independent reviewer. He's called on representative bodies and the public to have their say. He's publishing an interim report on ensuring the state pension age remains affordable and fair for all beyond 2028. He has said here, the future of the state pension age is a hugely important issue for the country. It must be fair and sustainable and reflect changes in society. Now, what are those changes? Well, of course, more and more larger proportion of the population reaching an age where they need the state pension, but unfortunately the money isn't there to pay for it. We've shown this graph, this pie chart many times. It's a little out of date now. It hasn't changed very much. Actually, we're still around 750% of GDP in debt as a nation. We're not talking about just government debt. This is all kinds of debt. But the biggest debt, in inverted commas there, is the state pensions pot, which is run like a Ponzi scheme. It relies on taxpayers' money being paid into the system in order to pay out the state pension to pensioners. And also included in that figure is of £5 trillion is the public pension pot. So what this actually means is that it's another recognition from the government that state pensions are unaffordable as the demographic gets older and we have more of an obligation on the taxpayer to pay state pensions. We aren't going to be able to pay them, and they're going to have to push the pension age out. That's what this is about, and it remains to be seen where it ends up. But we've said it before in this program. David Scott has said it as well, and I'm sure he would have said it again today. We don't believe that anybody younger than the age of 45 or so is going to get any state pension. They're certainly not going to have a formal retirement age.
I'll just add to that, Mike, where does it end? Well, we think we're getting the evidence for where it is actually ending, and that is evidence that elderly people are being quietly dispatched through the NHS care system. And if you think that's an outrageous comment, then stay with the UK column over the coming weeks, because evidence coming out of high levels of the NHS, and indeed people who've worked at extremely high level in the NHS, are now showing the data for the fact that the so-called care pathways are being used in order to make sure there aren't too many elderly people around to draw those pensions. I'll just make one closing comment, and that is that in our chat box while we've been speaking, somebody said surely there must be a lawyer who would represent Melanie Shaw pro bono to do it free, effectively. This is not the issue. The issue that we're dealing with is the fact that Melanie is constantly being handled in a corrupt, closed court system. So despite sacking her legal team, they continue to operate for her, even though the judge certainly is aware that Melanie does not want that legal team. We also understand the pressure has been put on Melanie more recently to ensure that she plays with that game. So it's not simply a question of, isn't there an honest lawyer or solicitor or barrister? We think there are some, but of course even they can't operate in a court which is closed to the public. It's simply a place of business for the judge, and the judges do as they please. This is the state of UK at present, and this is the state of UK where we have David Cameron or Tony Blair or Theresa May standing on the world stage lecturing other countries such as Syria, possibly Russia, as to how they should conduct their internal affairs. I think the word is obscene, and of course this system can only be propagated by the fact that we have three parties, Labour, Lib Dem and the Conservatives, who are all in on the act. And if we're going to turn UK around, what we need is for proper independent MPs who are actually working for the interests of the nation in its full sense to be in Parliament. We've got to get rid of these corrupt political parties and the whips who control the members using, for example, child abuse. We'll leave it there. That brings us to the end of our news today. I'm very sorry that we lost David Scott, but I'm sure he'll be back with us next week. Have a good weekend. Have a look into the conferences coming up. Do some research. Be nice to your neighbours because you might need them in the near future. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.